This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, gabylapera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me today, I have Dr. Rebecca Gilmour of Mount Royal University in Canada. Good morning. How are you?
I am great. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you. Can you tell people where Mount Royal is?
So Mount Royal is in Calgary, Alberta. So we're really close to the Rocky Mountains, and it can be a little cold, but it's sunny pretty much all the time. So Alberta is just east of the Rocky Mountains. So you've got British Columbia, then Alberta, then a bunch of prairies, and then you're out farther east to sort of Toronto type area. So we're kind of right in the middle of the country.
Yes, which makes it a perfect place to go other places. Also, as we were talking before I started recording, the Calgary Stampede is there, which is Canada's largest rodeo.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, I haven't actually been to the Stampede. I shouldn't admit that because I've been here for long enough that I should have gone. But I grew up riding horses and I still ride horses. So it's kind of like the perfect place to be.
Okay, I horseback ride too, and we're going to have to talk later about this because I don't think anyone wants to hear us talk about this on the show.
Well, they might, but yeah, we'll put a pin in that.
I know. One day I really want to interview someone who does bioarchaeology of horseback riding because there's a few people who do that. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. You. I'm also really excited because I think you're only the second Canadian that I've had on.
Oh, no way. That's okay.
Yes. And also the other person also studied cortical bone, which listeners, we're going to talk about bones today. I know we've done like a lot of teeth in the last year. We've done a fair amount of forensic anthropology. And today we are going to be talking about bioarchaeology and how you can use bones to understand the past.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. I'm glad we're definitely on the same page about what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I think before we get started, just because it has been a really long time, I know people listen to these out of order. Can you explain to people, I want to enter from like an approachable point.
Mm-hmm.
First, I guess, how can we use bones? Like, what are things that you can look at on bones that can tell you how someone lived their life? Or, well, how can you use bones to understand physical activity if the person's not around to tell you anymore?
Absolutely. Okay, so there's a few main things that we might look at, or the things that I've predominantly up until this point been looking at are things like cortical bone shape, or the shape of the outside aspect or the outside diameter or edge of the bone. And that can tell you a lot about how active somebody was. And you can also look at bone thickness, and that can tell you about somebody's activity levels. Some researchers look at what are called enthesial changes, which is where the muscle attachments connect to the bone, and they look at the rugosity and the sort of topography of those enthesial changes to say something about activity. Others use arthritis, but that is also associated with age-related changes and trauma and other things like that, so less activity-based. And some of us in the field that I'm kind of moving into are using trabecular bone microarchitecture. So our bone is comprised of cortical bone on the outside, which is like the hard outer shell. And on the inside of our bones, we have trabeculae. And trabeculae are like spider webby, spongy structures. And they're these series of interconnected struts. And those struts themselves also add strength and durability to the bones. So when we load our limbs and we walk on our legs and all of these things, our cortical bone is absorbing some of that load, but so is our trabecular bone. And both of them change and both of them reflect the types of activity that we do in our lives.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, excellent. That was almost like out of a textbook explanation. That was incredible. Second, if listeners are interested to see what bones look like on the inside, because it is really cool if you get like a pig bone or a cow bone, which you can get at like a butcher, and then you can like eat the meat.
Yep.
So we're not being wasteful. You can cut into the bone, and they have similar loading stuff, and Their bones are similar to ours. So you can see what it looks like on the inside, and it's really neat. It's like a spongy, bony cloud on the inside.
Yeah, it's like one of those chocolate bars that have the sort of like arrow bars, like the connect the bubbly bits in the middle and the hard outer candy shell on the outside.
Yeah,
it's like that.
That's so true.
Or there's like a toffee covered one, or like a coffee crisp or something like that.
Oh.
That might be a Canadian chocolate bar.
Coffee crisp is Canadian, but apparently they have started carrying them at certain grocery stores in the Bay Area, and I'm very excited because I don't know why we don't have coffee candy bars. That sounds so good.
I don't think I've had one in years. I should maybe after this podcast, I'll go get myself a coffee crisp. Anyway, the interior is bubbly and spongy. And if you do that with like animal bones, just aim for the ends because we've got more tuberculate on the ends of the bones than we do in the middle.
Yes. Yeah. And then in the very, very center, there is something called the medullary cavity. Hmm. And that's because bones do a lot of stuff besides just supporting it's not just like the interior structure of your body. That is a very important thing, but it does things like create red blood cells and other stuff. And also they need like a supply of blood because your bone is living tissue, which I think it's very easy to not think of it that way especially when you see it coming out of an animal, or if you're like me, and you normally are just hanging out with skeletons of people who are already dead. Like a few episodes back, I had an anthropologist named Dr. Buterick come in, and she talked to me about sinus cavities. And she was like, sinus cavities are covered in goo when you're alive. And I was like, I had never thought about that because I've only ever seen them nice and dry.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, bone and like living bone is incredibly dynamic and it's constantly remodeling and constantly turning over. And like you said, the medullary cavity can be a spot where we have different types of marrow that forms red blood cells, or maybe it's a fat type marrow. And it's kind of like the body's bank in a way, is that we can draw on what's going on in our bones to help fuel other aspects that we need.
Yeah. People also don't think about bones as like a site for endocrine action. So like for hormones, but they also do hormones. Bones are super cool.
Yep, absolutely. I'm glad you think so too.
Yes. So you mentioned the word remodeling. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because that also falls into this kind of category of bones being dynamic organs.
Yeah, for sure. So when our bones are formed, they're not finished, right? So when we're born, we have sort of little models and, cartilaginous blobs, and those slowly grow and slowly turn into bone and ossify, and those model. And then as we hit maturity and our bones fuse together and the ends of our bones glue on to the center long shaft of our bone, now we've hit our sort of skeletal maturity point, and our bones are going to remodel. And so they're going to turn over and essentially heal themselves, because everything, all the stresses and all the strains and all the loads that we put on our body throughout our lives actually can cause micro trauma to our skeletal system and to our bones themselves. And that micro trauma doesn't necessarily mean that we have like broken bones and fractures and all of these sorts of things. It's like little cracks or, little imperfections. And then the body, the cells in the bones have a way of identifying the locations of those micro trauma and essentially eating them away and then replacing them with new good quality bone. So that's happening essentially all the time as we're living. When we're younger adults, that remodeling process tends to be a little bit more active. And then as we age, that remodeling process can slow a little bit. And it can be that it's where we're eating away the bone a little bit faster than we're actually laying that bone down. And some of that then articulates with things I think we'll talk about later about inactivity and things like that. When we're not using our bodies and we're not using our bones, there's a chance that that remodeling process can become imbalanced, and you can have the cells in the bones eating away more than is actually actively being replaced.
This is one of the reasons that they tell little old ladies to weightlift, because that helps do these like little micro traumas on the bone, which helps increase bone density, which helps prevent osteoporosis, which is
exactly
one of the things we're probably.
And our bones are kind of like a bank as well, is that we want to do as much loading and bone building as we can in our younger adult years, or even before that, like while we're growing up. And then through our younger adult years, because we hit a point and then we have to start withdrawing bone from that bank because it's a lot harder to build it. And so you really want to start your adulthood with a good, I don't know, my bank analogy isn't working anymore, but with like a good amount of bone that you have enough to be able to remove, so that when you're really old, your bone is still robust.
Yes, definitely. And then so it works like on a larger level, but it also works like on a more individual level. So if you use, for example, you're a fisherman and you are constantly casting nets with your right arm is going to start to develop more bone and in a different way than your left arm.
And you would see it in the musculature first, right? Is that you're going to see the muscles start to build up, and you might have an asymmetry in the one arm because that arm is being used a little bit more than the other arm, or used differently than the other arm. And that musculature that you're seeing will then also be translated down to the skeletal system below it.
Yes. And the way that it does that is, as you mentioned earlier, the muscle attaches to the bone. So the muscle, when you're moving it around, the way that muscles move is by pulling on bone and creating like a pulley, like lever action. And when it pulls on the bone, it does these little micro cracks on the surface, and then you get buildup.
Yeah. And I mentioned also shape is one of these things that we're looking at as well. And when you have forces that are pulling on bone in slightly different directions, you may actually have bone that becomes less circular in diameter or in like cross section. And that sort of like the more angular looking or less circular type cross sectional shapes of long bones can indicate greater activity depending on the bone.
Yes, this is actually a really cool, you had like a very good article that I am going to find now and read you.
I bet it's The Changing Shape of Paleopathology.
You are correct. It is called The Changing Shape of Paleopathology, the contribution of skeletal shape analyses to investigations of pathological conditions, which I really, really liked and is available completely free online. And I'll link it in the show notes just in case anyone wants to read about it.
Awesome.
But geometric morphometrics. It's 8:30 and my brain's still not awake. And I was like, what is the word that comes before morphometrics? Geometric.
Yep.
That was me referencing my notes, dear listeners. Can you kind of explain there's like so many ways that you can use this, which is really, really cool. But I don't want to get too sidetracked talking about things that other people do. Can you talk about like how you are using it in your research?
Yeah, so I don't do GM, like geometric morphometrics personally, but in this particular paper, I collaborated with Kimberly Plomp, who does, and she's done some really fantastic research looking at, so essentially GM is a way of placing, and please, GM people don't come for me if I describe it ever so slightly wrong, but essentially you place landmarks on bone surfaces, and you can do it in a 3D world and place them on 3D models, or you can use it with a microscribe and place like in actual life and place these little landmarks on bones, or you can sometimes do it from like really systematically taken photographs and look essentially at the shape patterns that those landmarks form. And then you can use PCA analyses. I think it's statistical analyses essentially to look at and compare the differences in the shapes that are produced. And so GM is something that I'd love to do more of, but it hasn't been something that's featured in my research at this, like up until this point. But it's really essentially like a way of really, really detailed shape analyses so that we can compare individuals and we can compare groups of individuals and look for really minute differences in ways that are more sensitive, perhaps, than just like a simple linear measurement. So rather than just measuring the distance from point A to point B and then comparing it to the distance from point C to point D, you're looking at all four of those points together in a single space.
Yeah, you're looking at the relationship between all the points.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's really cool because you mentioned earlier that when we're babies, like our bones are cartilaginous and then like they start to ossify and they start to grow together but like one of the things that is mind blowing if you stop to think about it is that our bones typically do that and they've maintained the shape and they like figure out even as they're like getting longer, like they're maintaining like these relationships between each point. And that's crazy.
Well, and some of that can be influenced by the activity that you're doing in childhood as well, is that if you're a highly active kid, you might have a periosteal diameter, so periosteum is the living layer on the outside aspect of the cortical bone. And you could have a periosteal shape that reflects the activity that you were doing in childhood. And a lot of the bone that we're building is being built in childhood. So yeah, like the bone is maintaining its like general morphology and general, like they all kind of look the same. But then within that, there's all of these sort of little changes that can be influenced because of what we were doing and how we were doing it while we were growing up.
Yeah. And then on top of that, beyond like the physical activity component, there's also like a health
absolutely
component as well. So like if you were really sick as a child, that can also affect your femur is still going to look like a femur, but it might affect how like your individual femur looks.
Exactly. So vitamin D deficiency, for example, is a big one with that, is that you could have essentially a poor mineralization of some of the bone tissue that causes when you put weight or loads down through your lower limbs when you're learning to walk, that poorly mineralized bone tissue can essentially bend a little bit. So you get kind of bendy, twisty lower limbs occasionally with conditions like vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah. If you want to look up examples on the internet, if you put into, I've actually recently switched from Google to Bing as a search engine.
Whoa.
I know. I feel like I'm like in 1998, but Bing is really good.
Okay.
But if you put into whatever your search engine of choice is, in the images, if you put in rickets bones, you will get some really good examples of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it depends on how the individual is moving as to which bones are affected. So if the individual is crawling, then their upper limb is also affected. If the individual is only walking, then it's their lower limb, so on.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your particular research. A lot of your research has focused on an Italian town, Villa. I don't know how to pronounce
Vanieri.
Vanieri. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was not how I was going to pronounce it. And then Ancaster, which is in the UK. Feel pretty confident about that one. And you were looking at ancient Romans.
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of what I do is actually ancient Roman work. And I love the ancient Romans, especially ancient Romans that lived on like the fringes of the empire. So the people out in the frontier, the provinces. And I've grown a little bit from looking at the UK town versus the Italian town. And currently a lot of my work is actually on a place called Carnuntum in Austria. So it's about 40 kilometers east of Vienna. And I'm doing sort of a deep dive into the people that lived in this former Roman capital city out on the edges of the empire. So yeah, Romans. I love Romans.
Me too. I was, you know how like little, well, I don't know if all little kids, but you know how some little kids have fascinations with certain archaeological histories?
Yep.
Mine was Rome. I know other people like Egypt or like ancient Greece, but I loved the Romans.
Yeah. Well, and I came to the Romans a little late because I think when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. And when I was a kid, I think I started with Egypt because that was what was, you know, the majority of the documentaries on the History Channel, when the History Channel showed documentaries, were
revealing your age.
I know. They were mostly Egypt and Greek, lots of Greek stuff. So I was like, I'm going to be an archaeologist and I'm going to do these places. That's what I'll look into. And then it switched to Rome.
They're so interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about Roman life as you understand it in these like rural outlets? So basically, you're looking at people who live in the holler, as you would say, if you were from Virginia, like I am.
Yeah, like it seems that way. Like they're out in the boonies, like, you know, just rural. But a lot of these places, although they're on the fringe of the empire, they're not actually all that fringe. They're big cities. Like the place that I'm looking at right now in Austria is actually at its height. It had something like 50,000 inhabitants in this capital city. And it's far enough from Rome that it feels like it's frontier and it feels like it's really distant. But it's still like this really dynamic hub of activity. It's really cosmopolitan too. Like there's a tombstone in Carnuntum for an individual who was stationed in what's now modern day Syria. And he met his wife there, and then they moved back to Austria and they lived in Austria. And so they're coming from all over the Roman world, all over this empire region, and then they're coming to settle in some of these frontier regions and sometimes really bustling cities. Vanieri was not that. Vanieri was more, from what I understand, it is the site that my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, excavates as part of her primary research program. And it was, oh shoot, I haven't thought about Vanieri in a little while. It was sort of like an imperial estate. So it is people that are being either brought to Vanieri to work at Vanieri. They're either slaves or freedmen predominantly, and they're producing goods for the benefit of the emperor. So they're a little bit more rural, a little bit more farming and sort of like agriculture type focused. But there's also still a really interesting little settlement that's associated with Vanieri as well. And I was looking at activity associated with injuries at these places, particularly arm and leg, so limb injuries. Do you want me to keep going?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, so one of the things that you mention in your articles is that it's interesting so there's a lot of injuries. There's a fair number of injuries. You look at a lot of breaks, and one of the things that you did was you compared what people did in Ancaster versus Vanieri when those breaks happened in terms of like recovery. So like, do people start getting back to activity?
Yeah.
Yes. Did that help?
Absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. So when they happen, so I'm not really, with fractures, you're not able to really tell if somebody sustained an injury a year before they died or 10 years before they died. So I'm not looking at when they happened in terms of like how long before the person died was the injury.
Right.
But rather like, what did they do when they had an injury? And generally, I mean, I think it kind of holds true for both populations with some kind of exceptions that I've not quite had a large enough sample to really investigate yet. But I was finding, at least when looking at cortical bone, that individuals didn't seem to have a large amount of bone loss. So what happens is if we break a limb, typically we might be expected, especially for like a lower limb, like a femur or something, we might be expected to kind of rest it for a little while and rest our body. We might not be able to put weight through that lower limb. And because of that, if we're resting for too long, it can cause bone loss. And then that bone loss is something that we can measure as bioarchaeologists to try and identify that the person unloaded that limb, possibly as a result of the recovery process after the fracture. I was finding at both sites, but especially at Vanyeri, I wasn't seeing any real evidence of this unloading. So I wasn't seeing bone loss in any of the limbs that might indicate that the individual rested for a really long time after that fracture. And also that they didn't really favor that limb after the fracture. So to me, it meant that they were kind of getting back to that activity. Like they were either in a situation that didn't really allow them to lay around for very long, which is entirely possible, especially given this imperial estate type context where they're farming and they're producing goods and they can't just sit at home and hang out until they feel better. They've got to get back to it. But I also wasn't seeing any weird angulation or any weird deformity at the fracture site that suggested that they got back to work so soon. The fracture was unable to heal successfully. So they were waiting for long enough for that bone to mend just enough, and then they were launching themselves back into the activity that they were doing before, so it prevented against the bone loss.
Yeah, that was this is something I guess we were so focused on like building and remodeling and like changes like that affected rugosity, which is like the ruggedness of the bone, that we forgot to mention that bone is also kind of use it or lose it. If you don't use it, you start to your body's like, why am I investing in keeping all of this tissue around? And it starts to like come away. So like if you're bedridden, for example, or if you go to space.
Yes, there's so many interesting space studies. Yeah.
Because there's no gravity in space, so there's no pressure on your bones.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're doing some really interesting experiments and whatnot where they're having people essentially be bedridden as if they were in anti-gravity in space, but using like flywheels and sort of like suspended bicycle parts and things like that, so that they're loading their bones and they're exercising to see if that can prevent the bone loss, so that when they come back to Earth, they adapt back to the sort of gravity that we have a little bit more easily. But the same thing sort of happens if you have a spinal cord injury or if you have a pretty significant fracture, or even there's studies that look at tuberculosis and bed rest associated with some of these infectious diseases. And you start to see possible patterns of bone loss associated with people essentially taking more time laying down.
Yeah. Yes. So back to your Romans. This is really interesting because you're essentially able to kind of understand an aspect of medical care via the bones.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hoping to get at, is that like it's hard to say for sure from the angulation of how a fracture is healed if a treatment was applied or not applied, because bones can heal really, really well even without medical intervention. So this like being able to look at the actual bone adaptation after the fact gives me sort of a little bit of insight into sort of that person's experience. Even if I don't know for sure if they were attended to by, say, a physician or somebody who did medical treatments, I know how they felt or how they may have felt after the fact if they favored that limb or didn't favor that limb, and basically how that would have affected their life, and it would have affected their ability to move, and it would have affected their ability to kind of either walk or lift things. And I think that is an interesting sort of window into the human experience. When you can't talk to these people, what can you do to ask them questions that help understand what their life might have actually been like? And in my case, I'm doing that through this activity analysis.
Yeah. And it's amazing. It's super interesting. You have another really good article about the bioarchaeology of impairment and disability. It's Beyond Mortality, Survivors of Epidemic Infections, and the Bioarchaeology of Impairment and Disability.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Yes.
And that one I co-authored. So essentially all of my work kind of tackles or touches on looking at these everyday experiences and looking at experiences of people who might not actually be captured in some of our bioarchaeological analyses, and identifying impairment and how that might have impacted individuals. And so in this article, the Beyond Mortality article, that was I wrote with Heather Battles, who we actually did our PhDs together. And then we went, she's based in New Zealand now. And so we've gone, we're spread out around the globe. But during COVID, like during the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about how we would all adapt our research programs and, what are we going to do and what are we going to. So Heather and I got together and we're like, let's write a paper about all of the things that we've always talked about. And so it was this really great opportunity for us to kind of over Zoom or over Skype or whatever it was, Google Meets, who knows, to like hang out with each other during the pandemic, brainstorm ideas, and then write them down in this article. And what we were seeing, at least during the COVID-19 pandemic, was that there were these cohorts of people with long haul COVID symptoms that were causing them, health related challenges, activity related challenges. And that we were also seeing in the bioarchaeological literature a trend toward talking more about bioarch care and talking more about people's experiences of impairment and disability. And so we brought kind of the inspiration from the COVID-19 pandemic and these long haulers into the bioarchaeological past through the lens of polio, because polio is Heather's primary research focus. And polio can be quite debilitating, but it doesn't have to be. Is that there's sometimes people that have polio and then survive polio and go on and they may have some impairment, they may have no impairment, but they are still survivors of this epidemic. And so we proposed that there is this survivor cohort of people who may be in part identifiable in the bioarchaeological record, but also might not be identifiable because they were experiencing invisible impairments like blindness or other things that we can't actually see or we frequently can't see in the skeletal record. So the one challenge is that because there's so many diseases and there's so many conditions and there's so many cultures and so many archaeological circumstances and so many attributes or so many variables, we can't propose one specific way to identify this survivor cohort or to analyze the survivor cohort. But instead, we were kind of exploring the fact that we should recognize that these survivors exist and they're in our assemblages that we're looking at when we're doing bioarchaeology.
And so how should that affect how you approach an assemblage?
Well, oh gosh. It would differ for every question, but I think for me, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is looking for those people who might not have their voices heard. And so when I'm doing my activity analyses, when I'm doing my pathology and my activity kind of merged together, I have a sample of individuals that I know have that pathological change. So, and mostly it's fractures and trauma. I'm moving into arthritis and stuff like that as well. And then I have a sample of individuals that have no pathological indicators, at least none that fit that I'm looking for. And I'm comparing those individuals without the indicators of pathology to those with indicators of pathology. And I'm trying to identify how the ones with pathology may differ or not differ from the non-pathological group. And occasionally, I find people in the non-pathological group, the people that are like my control sample, that don't fit with the rest of their non-pathological cohort. And I'm wondering, at least in my case, if those ones that are the outliers, even though there's no real clear evidence for why they should be outliers, if those might be some of those people who have survived various things, whether I can't say if it's epidemic or not, but various pathologies or experiences or activity trends that differed from the rest of their population. So for me, I'm looking for outliers. I want to look at all the data and then I want to party with the outliers and I want to know like what's going on with them. And I want to tell their stories because they're a little bit different. And I feel like they don't like those are the ones that need, a voice and somebody to kind of explore their experience a little bit further.
Yeah, there was, I'm reading a book right now. I'm going to interview the author soon. Her name is Kate Clancy. She's an anthropologist at, I want to say it's Indiana.
Okay.
And she studies periods. And one of the things that I've really taken away from this book is that science loves an average.
Mm-hmm.
It loves the mean. It loves looking at the norm. But that doesn't really tell you, when you say norm, even like that, norm can exist on either end of the spectrum, right? It's
absolutely. And I've tried to switch. I say typical as much as I can because there's so much that's like, but even it's just semantics at the end.
Yeah. No, but I think it's like worth like assessing the language that we use because it affects the way that we think about things. But I'm like, that is really cool. You are doing exactly that. You're like saying like, okay, well, like these people still existed and they still had experiences. And like, also maybe people that we are seeing as quote unquote normal, mm-hmm. right? Like you're seeing potential changes in them that you're like, you know what? Like, I think that they may have experienced something. It may not have left an exact imprint on the bone that is as obvious as like myelitis or like a fracture or something like that.
Yeah.
But you can see something is different about them, and like trying to understand like how could their lives have been different because of that. So cool.
Exactly. So I think so. I mean, it's sometimes you find somebody who looks different in shape, but there's no actual indicators on the body at all of any sort of pathology. And I feel like they will always sort of, well, I don't want to say always. They remain mysteries until they don't remain mysteries anymore. And a lot of them just remain mysteries. And maybe there'll be a DNA or something like that eventually that'll allow us to characterize everything that's going on with them. But sometimes they're affected by things, or they may experience things or move in certain ways, not for pathological reasons, but just because that's who they were. But even that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Is there any particular individual that you've worked with that you found just like really interesting that you, I don't know how to say this without sound, well, you know, it's all anthropologists here, but it's someone like you get attached to.
I have, yes, actually. So I'm working, like I said, I'm working with this Austrian Roman period assemblage right now. And there's a couple of individuals in there. Two of them I'm working with students as case studies on because I find them fascinating. And I'm really curious. There's one of them that I really want to tell her story or their story in like a life history sort of sense, because I'm curious if what she experienced would have affected her differently earlier in her life versus later in her life. And she's quite an older adult at this point when she died. And so it may have actually, like, her lived experience of that pathological condition may have changed over the course of her life. And I think that's kind of really interesting to look into, is somebody's essentially story, their life story, through their bones. I don't know how successful we'll be. I have all of the highest hopes because it is really interesting and it's kind of work that I'd like to branch into. And then I have another individual who is like the most robust, most interesting Roman man in this cemetery, at least so far. And he has all of these muscle attachments that are kind of all flared and enlarged, and he just looks massive. And I joke a little bit. There's a gladiatorial school, or they believe that there's a gladiatorial school at this site, and that, you know, when you stand on the cemetery location, you can almost see the gladiatorial school from the location within the cemetery. So I joke a little bit that maybe he's a gladiator and, you know, all of these things, but he is incredibly robust. And I'm really looking forward to kind of figuring out what's going on with him and sort of how his signatures of activity and how his skeletal remains, especially his arms and his legs, compare to some of the rest of the assemblage. Because it could just be that I'm seeing these enlarged muscle attachments and they're telling a story to me, but the shape of his bones is not going to be significantly different from the rest of the assemblage. I just haven't done it yet, so I don't know.
That's really exciting. No,
to be continued, but I find him fascinating.
No, totally. Like sometimes I don't know that there's a way to convey this until you actually do it yourself. But sometimes you pick up a skeleton, you're looking at it and you're like, whoa,
yeah,
this is crazy. Like how did this happen? How did you get so big?
I think he estimates out to be something like 6'1" or 6'3". I can't remember exactly, but he's a tall guy and he's got, you know, really robust bones. And I don't know. There's something about him that makes me want to kind of look into him more.
Yeah, totally. And what about the first individual? You said that there was like a pathology. Do you know what you're looking at, or are we revealing too much?
I'll keep it secret for now because I don't want to say too much, especially because I'm not totally sure. But there is an interesting, considerable length discrepancy in metacarpals that's paired with some other lesions across the body that kind of hints at some relatively rare conditions that could have really impacted her life as a Roman woman. So
okay, I'm so excited. I'm so invested in this. I know that I'm probably not going to see an article for at least like a couple years.
It'll be a while. So I've got a student working with me on it right now, and so hopefully it's something that you know, we do come to it. Like, we're doing a differential diagnosis right now, and we're doing our very best. But we may never actually land on one particular interpretation, just because it may be that the signs are vague enough or like not non-specific enough that we may have two or three, and then we just kind of go from there.
Yeah. And this is something that I think is worth mentioning when you're looking at pathology in the past, is that you can have signs that are as a result of multiple different conditions.
Exactly. And you're looking for the patterns of them, and you're looking for conditions that exhibit similar patterns and similar frequencies, but not everybody has exactly the same signs and symptoms. even if they have the same conditions. So I think,
Yeah. And I think that there is also a reason that a lot of anthropologists, especially in the past, have looked at things that are big and exciting because they're easy to identify on the bone. So for example, like syphilitic changes on the bone are pretty easy to identify, and that's pretty much it. That's what it is.
Yeah, it can be quite distinctive. Yeah.
But the other thing to think about with syphilis is that it doesn't always get to the bone. That's like actually the minority of cases. So like,
and I don't know what the figure is for syphilis, but for tuberculosis, it's something like 3 to 5% of tuberculosis cases affect the bone, which means that in our bioarchaeological assemblages, when we're looking at like a cemetery, if we find skeletal changes of TB, there are more individuals that had TB, but we can't see them.
Yes. Yeah.
And then that then touches back on this Beyond Mortality article with the survivor cohort, because they're there. We just can't see them.
Yeah. 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 It's super interesting. And like we have like modern TB numbers, right? But like, who knows how the disease has changed? It's been literally centuries.
Absolutely. Like you can't necessarily apply what we know today directly to the past. Like that doesn't it doesn't necessarily work that way. Yeah.
But you can still learn things, and it's really cool.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of being able to quantify changes. Is that like I don't mind observing things in a qualitative way, but like for me, if I can measure it, that rings a little bit more true to me. Like I feel like I can actually see the differences and measure the differences and statistically test the differences, and that makes me feel good.
I think that this is our first 2025 reminder to study math. If you are interested in anthropology, math can be super helpful.
Absolutely. If my high school math teachers knew that like now I teach statistics in an anthropology program now, I feel like they would never believe it. But I do love it. It is so important.
Yeah, no. And there's also something really satisfying about like plugging everything in and then like getting an answer.
Yeah. And I mean, we always have to be careful about the answer that we get, but like at least I feel like I've been methodical and systematic with my approach when I'm doing measurements and analyzing them in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels good.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to be very respectful of your time. So I have normally 3 questions, but because you have been in the field, I have an additional question for you, which is what is one thing that you pack that you take with you that isn't on like most people's packing list? You're like, I don't care that I'm going to Austria and they have like toothpaste there, but I want my own toothpaste. Whatever it is, like what's one thing that you feel like you can't live without in the field?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I am a terrible packer. I bring everything, even though I'm going to like Vienna and I know I can buy it all there. I bring it all with me because I just don't want to have to be bothered to like go out and find it. What a good question. I've started to scan like textbooks, and I shouldn't admit to that, but like just to have them in the field, because when I was a PhD student, I would bring the book with me and then it was all too heavy to carry. And so now I bring like my EndNote database or whatever with my PDFs so that I have something to refer to. But that's not a good answer.
No, but that's really smart.
It's even just having a copy of something like White and Fulkins, like the human osteology book, is something that is surprisingly handy. Or Scheuer and Black, the developmental juvenile osteology book. That one can be really, really handy, but also both of them are massive and hard to carry. But that's not a good answer. I don't know. I've been going back and forth to Vienna quite a bit lately, like just for the work that I'm doing with this Austrian collection. And I was an exchange student in Austria when I was just out of high school. And so going back to Vienna feels like going home. And it's almost at the point where I actually almost don't need to pack very much because I know that I'm going to want all of the things from there to bring home with me home. So it's almost like the tables are turned. And the stuff that I bring home is like, chocolate and like funky clothes and nice shoes and like that sort of stuff. Like, and so I feel like I'm not bringing it with me to the field anymore, but I'm waiting till I'm in the field and then bringing it all home.
That is so funny. So I think that most of the people I've asked this question to, it's like a lot of primatologists, or paleoanthropologists. So they're like, for the love of God, bring an extra pair of glasses. Like if your glasses break in the field.
Oh yeah. No, that would be smart.
So I think like a lot of people like have answers, or like someone was like, I don't care that it's impractical. I bring my own pillow.
Yeah. I can see that too, but I wouldn't do it because it's too much to carry.
Yeah. And I also think that going somewhere like Vienna, listeners, if you're perhaps not the type who wants to rough it, maybe consider a career in bioarchaeology instead.
Well, and I have to say I started doing like more traditional archaeology. In fact, the collection that I'm working with now is one that I helped excavate in 2008.
So cool.
And so it's it's kind of all come full circle, is that it's really neat now. I don't know how many years later, 15 years later, to be able to look at the stuff and see some of the recording forms that I did. I worked for a contract archaeology company out there. And so I was, helping with the recording forms and things, and really terrible German. And you said there's, my chicken scratch and German and all of these things. So it's really kind of neat to have it come full circle. But when I was in the field there, it was definitely more traditional. Like I wanted boots and changes of socks and, various types of long sleeve and short sleeve and tank top type shirts, because who knows if you're digging in the rain that day type thing.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever said what my like weird thing that I take everywhere with me, because I do travel quite a bit, and that is Harney and Sons Paris tea.
Oh,
I'm obsessed with it. I love it so much. And they make it in these little foil packs, which are probably terrible for the environment, but it means like the freshness is sealed in. And sometimes when I'm abroad, I'm like, I just want a cup of tea that I know exactly what it's going to taste like.
Yeah, like just a little bit of home comfort, right? Like it's just something that you can bring with you that's easy to pack, consumable while you're there, so you don't have to bring it back home.
Yes. Yeah.
Smart.
I think we must have similar traveling styles, because I also hate hauling any. I'm like, the last time I traveled and I was gone for 2 weeks, I took a 25-liter bag, and someone was like, "Oh, this is pretty heavy." And I was like, first of all, this is my only bag.
Yep.
Second of all, I had to have a laptop in there.
Yep.
And also, this fits underneath the seat in front of me, so I don't want to hear it.
Well done. No, I bring a lot more than I really should, but like I know I bring way more home. So I've been starting to like put the suitcase inside the suitcase so that I can come home with the 2 suitcases, but go with one. But yes, I'm a bit of a heavy packer. It's mostly actually, I really like shoes. And so they take up space.
I'm so sorry, listeners, you've gotten to listen to our travel philosophies instead of about anthropology. So
right. Sorry, moving on.
Returning to the show.
Yeah.
Maybe this is useful for people. Maybe I'll inspire someone to pack a backpack instead of a giant rolly bag that they then have to drag over the cobbles of Rome. Anyway, the last 3 questions that I do every show. The first question is, if listeners want to learn more about the kind of work you do, where is a good place for them to start? This can be articles that you've written, or it can be like a good basic book in the space.
Yep. So I would say if you're looking at specifically what I've been working on, that Changing Shape of Paleopathology article that I wrote with Kimberly Plump, it's open access, totally free for everybody to kind of go and look at. That I would say sums up a lot of our ideas about where we're currently at and then where we could go next. And I think that's probably a really good starting point. And also in 2019, I published an article, Maintaining Mobility After Fracture, a biomechanical analysis of fracture consequences at the Roman sites of Ancaster and Bagnères. And I think that sums up a lot of sort of cortical bone changes that we were talking about as they're associated with trauma and fractures. So in terms of like my specific work, I would say I'd point in that direction. But in terms of looking at activity really broadly, I was very lucky to help co-edit a book recently in 2023 entitled Behavior in Our Bones, How Human Behavior Influences Skeletal Morphology. And in that book, so I have a chapter that's obviously on injury and impairment and, how we might actually look at the cross sections of bone and whatnot to be able to assess if somebody had an impairment following injury. But there's so many other chapters that are looking at enthesial changes or looking at the morphology of the hand specifically, or the skull or the spine, these sorts of things. We've broken it up, or it has been broken up into these sort of body sections, but the human body isn't really isolated in that way. So the book as a whole is like an exploration of the human body in the various ways that different scholars explore it.
Yeah.
So that might be, and I think we aimed to write that a little bit more at sort of like a junior career level audience. So that one might be a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, that one is really good. I actually read a fair amount of your chapter because for whatever reason, Google Books left a fair amount of your chapter available online.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
It was missing like 5 pages or something like that. But I was like, okay, yeah, no, it's really good. Anyway, I also recommend it.
Thank you. So I would say that's how I would point people in that direction for sort of looking at behavior and things like that. And then there's a few other papers that are starting to come out that are looking, well, I say starting to come out. It's always kind of always been there is these individuals or scholars have looked at sort of pathology as it relates to shape and all of that. So there's some work out there in the literature that also articulates stuff that I do quite well.
Awesome. Perfect. What are you reading for work right now?
I have a really heavy teaching load typically. And so frequently, I hate admitting this, but honestly, reading is a bit of a challenge. What I'm working on right now, or what I'm hoping to work on more intensively, is actually learning a new program to analyze micro CTs. And so it's called Dragonfly. It's pretty typical. Lots of people use it. You can get sort of a free institutional license and whatnot if you're affiliated with the university. So I'm working my way through like the video tutorials for Dragonfly to figure out how to use this new program so I can analyze some new data, which is kind of exciting. And a lot of the other type of reading that I'm working on is kind of associated with some of these case studies. So the one that I mentioned earlier about looking at the life course analysis of this one older woman. And then I have an interesting case of metastatic cancer from this Roman period cemetery as well. And I think it would be interesting to explore if I could do an activity analysis of how that individual with cancer may have moved essentially, but I think I might hit some challenges there because of the way that the cancer has spread throughout the bone. So I'm reading lots of papers around those. And I would say there's a really interesting case study, and I love it for a lot of different reasons. And I'm going to hopefully pronounce the author's name correctly. It's by Canci et al. It's a group of scholars, I believe, out of Italy. And it's in the International Journal of Paleopathology, and it's called A Severe Case of Bilateral Humerus Varus Deformity from the Middle Bronze Age Necropolis of Olmo di Nogara, Northeast Italy. The Contribution of Biomechanical Analysis to Paleopathological Study. So essentially, it's pretty much what the type of thing that I've been working on. And they take a really deeply contextualized analysis approach where they look at mortuary evidence and they look at paleopathological evidence. And then they look at this biomechanical evidence, from like the activity-based evidence that we've been talking about, to really understand this particular individual and then speak about how that individual may have fit into and been seen within their social context, which I think is kind of what we should be all aiming to do, right? Is to really deeply contextualize the research that we're working on. I have more things that I have on my to-do list.
I just want to say that you're like, oh, I'm really not reading that much right now. And you just proceeded to list off just stuff, which I
know, but it's nothing specific. It's like I stumbled on this one study in the IJPP and I was like, oh, that's really cool. But I'm not like, I feel like it's nothing specific.
No, you actually just named a bunch of specific things. I'm going to go ahead and say it. And also you only have one brain. So like you don't need
like, oh my goodness. Well, there's a new book coming out on Roman bioarchaeology. I'm not in it, but I think it looks amazing. And then there's also this really interesting looking book on disability and antiquity. And that looks really interesting, but I've not read either.
But they're on the list.
Totally. But they're on the list. So I've got items on the list to read when I can read.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Sorry. You read a lot.
I guess
don't feel like you don't.
Okay.
You should be proud of yourself.
Well, there's moments in your career, especially when you're in graduate school and things, that you feel like you can actually just sit and read. Like you can sit on the couch and you can tuck into like articles and read them front to back, and you like read. And now I feel like I'm getting that whenever I can, but there's no chunk of 4 hours that I get to sit down and read anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that feeling. I was talking to a coworker the other day and he's like, I can't remember the last time I read a full book.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, okay. That's different from me for sure. But like, I think a lot of people feel that way now.
There's a group of us. So this is going to touch on your next question, I think. Do you want to ask your next question?
Yes. Thank you so much for setting me up. No one's ever done that. Thank you.
Oh, really?
What are you consuming for fun right now?
So there's a group of us, relatively like early assistant professors at my university. And we've decided that we need to be more than just the academics that we do for work. So we started a book club. And we are trying really hard to read books, like normal fiction, whatever. So we just finished reading a book called Remarkably Bright Creatures, and it's about an octopus in an aquarium and the lady that befriends this octopus, Marcellus.
Yes.
Have you heard of this?
This book is so good.
It was really good. I really enjoyed it. And it was like the perfect level of sort of light and easy to read, that it didn't feel too like academic-y, or I didn't have to think too hard. I just got to enjoy it, you know?
Yes. Yeah. She's a beautiful writer. That was a very interesting book because in that particular moment in history, there were like 4 really popular octopus books that year. I don't know why, but I read 3 of them. And so for a second, I was like, which octopus book was it?
Well, and I just called it the octopus book. I was like, so I had to write down the name up on a piece of paper for this podcast, because it was just the octopus book to me for forever. But yes, it was really good.
I read a fair amount of nonfiction, but I also read like a fair amount of what I call brain candy, which is like just junk. And I exclusively read it on my Kindle. So there are books that I don't know the title of. Like I have downloaded them and read them, and I can tell you what happened, but I don't know the author, don't know the title.
Don't know what it's called. So the other book that we're reading, and I probably shouldn't even admit to this, but I'm going to anyway. I'm reading it on my Kindle, but originally it was chosen because the cover was so beautiful. The cover of the book, you know, when you walk through like Chapters or Indigo or a bookstore, and sometimes there's just certain covers that just jump out at you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this was that cover. But the book is unfortunately called Murder Your Employer, The McMaster Guide to Homicide. I love my job. Everything is good. It's just an unfortunate book title for something with an actual beautiful cover, and the story is kind of interesting. But it's written by the man who also wrote the Pina Colada song. You know the Pina Colada song?
Yeah. Do you like pina coladas? Don't come after me for the rights.
Yeah, that one. So it's not bad at all. It's just gotten a bit of an unfortunate title.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I remember I read something a few years ago. I think it was called like the Poisoner's Handbook or the Poisoner's Bible or something.
I've heard of that one. I haven't read it though.
And I exclusively read nonfiction in hard copy because I like to mark things up.
Yep.
And I remember sitting on BART and having like a guy just like staring at me. Like, and I was like, what is this guy's problem? And then I realized I was like reading this book about, that also happened to me with a book about infanticide, but it was a book about infanticide in like animal populations. It wasn't like a how-to guide for how to kill your baby, but like,
that's when you need like a little like paper cover or something just to
I know. I was like, I need to get, I was like, how funny would it be if I got like a porn magazine? Like in like a kind of reverse situation.
Well, now you have to, right? So
no, don't worry. I'm just reading that. Infanticide and fish. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and for your explanations. This is an absolute pleasure, and maybe one day we'll have you back on to tell us more about your case study.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. I would actually love to do that. That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much for this. This was fun.
Of course. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.